Terrence McNally. Welcome to Free Forum, a world that just might work. And I'll be speaking today with Rebecca Goldstein, philosopher, novelist, and MacArthur Fellow, about the ideas in her new book, The Mattering Instinct, how our deepest longing drives us and divides us. And you can learn more at RebeccaGoldstein.com. On Freeform, we explore the lives, the work, the ideas of individuals that I suspect have pieces of the puzzle of a world that just might work. We look at politics, economics, environment, science, health, culture, all based on the fact that I believe we can do better, and I want to find out how. The show plays weekly on the Progressive Voices Network on TuneIn.com, and podcasts are available anytime, anywhere at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, most major podcast sites, YouTube, and at my site, terrencemcnally.net, TERRENCEMCNALLY.net. I get email newsletters all the time from the New York Times Book Review with lists like 6 new books we love. And I often check them out then or later and take note of some that I think might be worth looking into as potential guests on this podcast. A few weeks ago, when I came across The Mattering Instinct, I did something I'm not sure I've ever done before. I read the one paragraph description and immediately found an email address for Rebecca Newberger Goldstein and sent her an invite, and thankfully she said yes. I know I have been consciously concerned with the question of mattering since at least grade school, and here, a couple of months short of 78, it's still very much on my mind. I do a bit of journaling, and over the last few months, some form of that question has been showing up again and again. I'm repeatedly surprised when I learn of someone because of a book review or an op-ed or a profile and discover they've been doing remarkable work in areas I care about for years. Like all of us these days, I'm flooded with information and take note of a lot of it, yet somehow these compelling explorers have escaped my awareness. And so it has been with Rebecca Goldstein. Rebecca Newberger Goldstein is a fairly unique hyphenate these days, a philosopher novelist. Now, I say these days because if you recall, in the mid-20th century, this was not so unusual, at least in France. Think Sartre, Camus, de Beauvoir. Goldstein received a PhD in philosophy from Princeton University with a concentration in philosophy of science and philosophy of mind. She was awarded a MacArthur Fellowship, popularly known as the Genius Grant, in 1995, was inducted into the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 2005, and in 2015 was awarded the National Medal of the Humanities by President Obama. She's the author of 11 books of fiction and nonfiction. And knowing that her novels will wrestle with ideas and that her nonfiction will be written by a novelist, just listen to the titles. I find them all like, when can I get my hands on that one? Her fiction includes The Mind-Body Problem, 36 Arguments for the Existence of God, Properties of Light, Mazel, The Dark Sister, Strange Attractors, and The Late Summer Passion of a Woman of Mind. In the nonfiction, Incompleteness, The Proof and Paradox of Kurt Gödel, Betraying Spinoza, the renegade Jew who gave us modernity, Plato at the Googleplex, Why Philosophy Won't Go Away, and her latest, the one we're focusing on today, The Mattering Instinct, How Our Deepest Longing Drives Us and Divides Us. Though perhaps cataloged as a work of philosophy, The Mattering Instinct grew out of her work as a novelist and has a firm foundation in her understanding of physics. It's an idea that I think has obvious appeal, whether it's in the doubts or aspirations whispered in my own self-talk, or that a lack of a sense of mattering shows up repeatedly in suicide notes. But Goldstein sat with this notion for years, testing it, questioning, and developing it, till she was ready to put it out in the world, not as heady speculation, but as bold assertion. We'll talk about that process, about the implications of this perspective on our individual and societal understanding of what it means to be human, and about how we can put this understanding to use to help us turn things around in this challenging time of tribalism and social and political regression. Welcome, Rebecca Goldstein, to Freeform, a world that just might work.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Terrence.
And let me tell people we're recording this conversation Tuesday, March 17th, 2026. So, Rebecca, I like listeners to get a feel for the people behind the work and the ideas that we talk about. We've got an hour. I'm going to ask you to start it off telling us in your words how you see your path to the work you do, the life you lead, and feel free to go way back. Childhood inspirations, mentors, turning points. Take it away.
Okay. As you probably know, there are so many ways that one can tell a story and the story of one's own life. Many ways one can tell it. But I usually do begin with my childhood. I was born into a very religious family. My father was a refugee from Ukraine, a refugee from very bad things that were going on in Europe when he came and escaped, and truly was an escape to the United States. And so I was born into a very religious family, and I was a very serious child. I took it all very seriously. I was not having, been brought up in that kind of family. I was not brought up to have any ambitions other than to be a good, modest, and obedient girl with great emphasis on modesty, as it is, this is Orthodox Jewish and particularly female modesty, very,
Oh my
very
gosh, yes.
important. Yes, even to the point of uh, I was born into a very musical family that my father supported us not very well, but as well as he could by being a cantor. And so he was a very musical person. Um, and we all were musical. But we were actually, I had an older sister, unfortunately, she died young, but she had, a glorious voice. And, but the modesty went to the point of that a woman's voice was not to be heard outside of the house, that it was a tool of seduction. So,
And by
so
the way, this is what, the 1960s, 1970s.
that's right.
It,
That's
it
right.
seems
Yes, everybody's
so
everybody's running around in their mini skirts, and
right.
the sexual revolution is happening, exploding around me,
And
and
she can't sing outside the house.
dancing as a so, you know, and so I therefore, I think of how did I get here? How did I get to meet President Obama? In one generation, my father came with literally nothing. I mean, happy for the rest of his life just to be alive and to raise his family in security and safety. That's what the US meant to that immigrant. And
At that point.
at that point, I was raised on these stories, yes.
Yeah.
And, yeah, and that here, in one generation, here I was getting this national. So, it's also unlikely whenever I look back, and I have to say, I look back at my own immodesty in the sense that I've taken on such ambition. It kind of shocks me.
That's right. That's right. In
Yeah.
other words, what would be, not everyone would think, oh, what you do is immodest, but
Where
it
I'm from,
is.
yeah, it
Yes. In other
is, it
words,
is.
how high do you aim? What shibboleth do you take on?
Exactly,
No
exactly.
modesty there.
No modesty, and, it was, I was allowed to, so we were very strict Sabbath observers, and so before, which meant that we could do barely nothing. There was hardly anything that we were allowed to do, but we could read. And so I was taken to the library, before sunset on Friday, got my Sabbath reading, and that was my, that's how I spent my Sabbath. And my
By the
parents
way,
were,
let me just say, I was brought up in what was a pretty strict Catholic family.
yeah.
Nothing like Orthodox, but Catholic school, you know, church, all of that, and that's a pretty tight box as well. Go ahead.
Absolutely, absolutely. But, my parents were pretty liberal insofar as what I was allowed to read. Um, And, and I concentrated very much on science. And my great ambition was, because it wasn't even clear I was going to go to college, really. Um, and my great ambition was that someday I would meet a physicist, you know,
To meet one.
to meet one, and of course I pictured a man, because yes, and yeah, so it's all, it's really, I think it's a great privilege that I somehow or other ended up living the life I have, got to study physics, major in physics in college, and then went on to try to connect all these different spheres um, of knowledge, which is what, in some sense, I tried to do in this
Well, let me
most
jump to what
ambitious, yeah,
I do want to ask a question, which is just as you left it kind of open there at the end. How did you make this leap? What switches flipped? What doors were opened or you
yeah,
opened, etc.
yeah,
But you can include into it how you think, because you just sort of stated it, how you think of your role and your work. In other words, you didn't say writer, philosopher. You said just trying to make sense and trying. So
yeah.
take.
That's what I think of the work of philosophy is trying to make sense how everything hangs together, everything understood in the largest sense possible. And where do we fit in? What are we supposed to do with our lives, um, in the midst of this? And so, how did, well, it was that reading, and the librarians were so very kind to me. I mean, I have so much gratitude toward the librarians. I grew up in White Plains, New York, which was a very unlikely place for my family to end up.
Well, that's
And
true. That's not the
yeah,
part of New York we usually find them. Go ahead.
no, 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 no. And in fact, I went to public school, which was strange too, but we were so extremely poor that only the one boy, there were the sisters, and there was the boy, and he was sent to the Jewish day school. But we girls were sent to public school. We were the weird, Jewish girls who couldn't eat in anybody's house and all of this, but that's okay. And it taught me it was okay to be different from everybody else. And I think that's a marvelous lesson to assimilate as a child. And I never cared about being the weird kid. And yeah, so these librarians, and I went through the children's library, and then they told me, it was probably 11 or 12, that I could go into the grown-up library. I thought I was such an obedient little girl. I thought
Well, I was going to say, based
I
on your
have to just keep
tradition,
rereading
you
these.
you saw rules where they didn't even exist.
Exactly, exactly. And they were so very kind. And I remember, I found my way to, I loved science. And then I started to read. I took a book called The Story of Philosophy by Will Durant. And that was my first taste of a kind of ecstasy, intellectual
Oh,
ecstasy.
what a lovely way to put it.
It really was, ecstatic. It comes from the ancient Greek word for stand beside. Stand beside what? Beside yourself. You're just outside of yourself in this, carried away into, this world. And it was when I was reading the chapter on Plato, and it was just I had to put down the book because my heart was beating so fast. I thought I was going to have a heart attack. And so I
And this
just
is at
loved.
about age 13, 14. This is middle school, kind of.
Yeah, 12, 13. And then I took out a book by Bertrand Russell called Why I Am Not a Christian. My parents looked at it. They didn't want me to be Christian, right? We're Jewish. So, but he goes through all the arguments for God's existence and deconstructs them, destroys them. And so, my parents had no idea how heretical sometimes the books that I was
Right,
imbibing
right. So
really
you're
were.
you're
And I must say, I sort of finished that book and I was an atheist. So, um, but yeah, anyway, so just the power of ideas hit me very, very early. That's what I would say. And I was determined,
so
even
that
though
somewhat to
yeah,
me, hearing someone who found liberation and found kind of the larger universe in books
in
to
books.
become someone who writes books
Yeah.
sort of
Yeah.
makes sense.
And it feels, it's just always felt like I never took it for granted. Felt like a privilege, that I could study whatever I wanted. And um, yeah, it was, it's, the excitement has never worn out. And I'm kind of a an ecstasy junkie. That sounds, but not the kind you, not the kind you swallow. It's, it's ideas, it's like, so I'm like always that kind of transcendence that I can get, that I experienced as a kid. I'm
Uh,
like always chasing it. Yeah,
I can certainly relate to that. But
yeah,
to the way you put it, to think that you get that experience from it's so. I mean, it seems like the way you're saying it for you, it's not rare. It's what you're looking for, and you find it.
and I find it in science. I find it in philosophy. I find it in art. Especially in literature. And I have a burning desire to give it to people, like
To give
to
them that experience of
that
transcendence,
experience.
that
Yes,
experience of
yes,
expansion.
of expand. Yes, right. It's such an enrichment of life. It's just, yeah. You feel like you're in touch with something larger than yourself.
So I want to talk about your process, which we're doing, but your process from the time that you sort of emerge into not just taking it in, but putting it back out into the world. And your first books were novels, correct?
Yeah, and that was
And let me
crazy.
just tell people, you've gotten your PhD from Princeton in,
Right.
in philosophy,
Yeah, philosophy of
and you're
science,
teaching
particularly.
philosophy at your
Right.
alma mater, Barnard, and
Right.
yet you end up writing novels. How did that happen?
Yes. It's that ecstasy ecstasy thing. I was getting ready for work one morning, and I was married then to a very smart man, a physicist. We used to, in fact, write physics papers together sometimes. And and we were both very young. We were both at the beginning of our careers. But I hear this sentence. I'm often asked what it's like to be married to a genius. It was not my voice. Uh, so it was, and I should say that I had just that weekend read a novel that I absolutely loved, and I thought to myself, I would like to write one of these someday. This gives me such deep aesthetic pleasure. I would like to do this someday. And then there comes the sentence, and I thought, oh, my mind and my unconscious has delivered me the first sentence of a novel. Now I just have to figure out who the character is, what the plot is, and so it was just kind of delivered. And again, it was sheer joy to write.
Oh
It
my
was,
God. You know how
yeah,
many writers would say that's not the case. I
I
will share,
know,
by the way, I I I am not tortured by writing.
yeah,
I'm not sure that I get sheer joy and ecstasy all the time, but I know writers. I live with writers. I was in the entertainment industry doing writing and working with writers, and so many do it, but it's painful.
it's
What a
painful.
gift!
Yes, it it is, and, to me, anything that allows me to escape outside of myself, ecstasy, stand beside yourself, get outside, is just kind of joy, and so, inhabiting a character who's not myself was really so much, it was very exciting,
Let me just
very
share
exciting.
a couple of references to novels that I thought of as I was thinking of this interview. One is I interviewed George Packer recently.
Uh-huh,
Okay,
yes,
so
yes,
George Packer has won big awards as a nonfiction writer, whether it's his magazine pieces or his books. And his latest book is a novel, and he hadn't written a novel in decades.
huh,
And the reason is he said that he felt that the facts weren't getting through. He said,
yeah,
I keep writing the same thing and people read it and they like it. It doesn't seem to make a difference. And he
yeah,
wondered whether a novel an
Yeah,
allegorical novel, a la his hero Orwell. Um,
yeah, yeah.
but whether that could, short circuit the sensors and the filters of habit and so on.
Yes, yes, very, very interesting, and it really is true. I mean, art, especially, novels, um, they get to people's emotions. You move people, which is such a fascinating phenomenon, that people can identify enough with, characters who are not themselves to really, get involved, engaged, and care about them. If only we could care about other real people the way we
True,
care,
true, true, true. And the
right?
the other point, the other point about a novel is, I'm in a couple of writing and reading groups, and one of them met this Saturday. And most of the folks in this group are just writing essays and short things and so on. But one of them has been working on a novel.
Yeah.
And so when he comes to the group, he shares a piece of his novel. And he had finished it, turned it into his editor and so on. And someone said, it's autobiographical based. What if you changed the voice from first person to third?
Mm,
And when
mhm.
he changed it to third, the character started having original impulses.
Yeah,
And I have
interest
a feeling that that must have been something also that you discovered when you were writing a novel. And it's
yeah,
it's what you say is that the root of this book, The Mattering Instinct,
yeah.
is in the dialogue of a character in a
Okay.
1983 novel.
It's so amazing to me, and, I was trained with, very, very rigorously, at philosophy, what we call analytic philosophy, no bullshit, everything very, very clear, precise, and, and I don't and I was really under the sway of that when at that time, I was very young, I had just gotten my doctorate, and, this is the way I'd been trained, and I don't know that I would have entertained the ideas that have turned out to be the most important to me and that now 40 years later, I finally had the courage to put them in a book. But, if they hadn't come to me by way of this intermediary character who was not as rigorous as I was, she could think this way. And I remember when my husband at that time, when he read the first draft, and he said, "Do you really believe this? This stuff about mattering that she put forth?" And I said, "Well, no, it's a character. It's a character." But yes, something, some part of me, and then when I found some years later that other academics, including behavioral economics professor, were publishing ideas that had been put forth in this novel, and actually, I
Oh,
read this.
right, right. That
Yeah,
other people were citing.
other people were citing this other academic, so it seemed to be okay, and it passed that. And then I thought, wow, I should give this more thought. This is I should not dismiss it just because it came from a character. But this kind of way, I mean, I guess it was me. I sometimes say I co-authored these
Oh,
first
right.
ideas, right? But no, I guess it was me. I guess I sort of knew this was true, but yeah, I sort of needed a
Well,
character.
but think
And
about it. As you
yeah,
said, at that point, your approach to philosophy was too rigorous,
it
too
was, yes,
too
it
with it.
was.
You were coloring outside the lines.
That's right.
So
That's
had
right.
that circumstance, that experience not happened,
Yes.
who knows if it would have come around again,
That's right. Yes, and, having written that first novel, I felt this is so original, and it takes a real problem in philosophy, what we about consciousness. Can consciousness be reducible to physical processes? And actually, I had written my PhD dissertation on this. But it puts it in a story that everybody can sort of, relate to. And then you see that's the other thing. And again, what Packer told you is very relevant. Like, you can hammer home these ideas, and I think thinking about these ideas are really important, but unless you can move people and twine it with emotion, a little bit of beauty, that which we want from our art, people are just not going to relate to it. And I think this is not for me.
Well,
So one of the things I'm
there are
committed
lots of
to, yeah,
people who would never find it,
that's right. Yeah,
who don't
yeah.
read philosophy,
I don't
but who
read
read
philosophy.
novels.
Yeah, and once I had done this, it was so exciting. I just kept doing it.
Yeah.
I kept, writing, novels, and my philosophical career really did take a hit because I was a woman in a part of philosophy. There were very few women in philosophy altogether, and in philosophy of science, philosophy of physics, philosophy of math, the kind of stuff that I was supposedly specializing in. And then that husband of mine had said, you're going to kill your nascent career before it can stand on two legs. But again, I think, I was chasing ecstasy wherever I could find it and writing novel, it
So
was doing it.
we have so much to talk about, but this part, obviously fascinates me. Um, do all of your novels wrestle with philosophical questions?
Yeah, they
What
do.
comes first?
Um, what comes first? It's usually I'm thinking about the problem, and then I'm thinking, hey, what would be a story that would really embody this kind of
Very
problem?
good.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah,
And
yeah.
then, um, how much of a role does story and narrative play in your books that others would consider philosophy?
Yeah, I think quite a lot. Because theory is theory. Some of us love it. But philosophy, I think philosophy ought to relate to life. Even if you're doing philosophy of physics, there's a way in which philosophy has to do. It's always talking about us and what we can know and the limits to our knowledge and what do we think we know that we don't know, and that applies to so many different spheres. And so it's basically it's a very human enterprise, philosophy, and there should be some way of putting it in a story.
And I mentioned, mid 20th century France, but if we look back at philosophy centuries ago,
Yeah.
philosophers were scientists
Yes.
and
Yes.
philosophers were novelists, and
Yes.
the siloing hadn't really happened.
No, it's so true. And it's really, what is it to be a human? That's one of the things that one's really dealing with here. And gosh, I mean, if you go back to the beginning, Plato, who, I adore, and yeah, that's where it all began. My first taste of intellectual ecstasy was Plato. He was a magnificent writer, and that those are dialogues. He creates characters. He uses real people and puts words and arguments into their mouth. He takes tremendous liberties. And his Greek, his ancient Greek, is the purest that has come down to us from the ancient Greek world. It's beautiful. And there are times, when he's very rigorous, and there's times when he just floats off into poetry and ecstasy. And um, yeah, so he did it, and I think philosophy had made a bad turn in becoming intimidated by science, which makes so much progress, and wanting to, I'm talking as somebody who was trained in philosophy of science, so I take
That's
science
right.
very
That's right.
seriously. But we're not meant to be scientists. Scientists are meant to
Let
be
me ask you
scientists.
this, because
Yeah,
I've often felt that biology also got set off track by
yeah.
by being intimidated by physics,
Oh, yes.
right?
And wanting to make
And I'm
everything
wondering, when you
mathematical.
say philosophy intimidated by science, whether you aren't speaking almost specifically of physics.
Yeah, very much of physics, right? That physics was able to take the precision of mathematics and marry it to empirical observation, and it was off and running. When
Yeah,
Galileo did that, um, for a long time it was floundering. It was on old Aristotelian framework, and then in the 17th century, it mathematized itself, and there we are. You know,
right, right.
and
And it
but
seems to me really that observation has
yeah,
returned to biology, sort of had to say, wait, I'm important too.
exactly. Observation, and in some sense, telling a story. Darwinianism It's a
Yes,
story. It's a narrative to, to explain how we
very
got
much so.
from there to here. And so, yeah, it's not, I love math, but we can't mathematize everything, and we certainly can't completely mathematize the human story.
Now, this is a question that occurred to me as I was going to sleep last night. What took you so long? Okay. And you know, I think what I mean.
Yeah,
Your character threw these ideas at you in 1983.
yeah.
You wrote several books and, made your mark. And then finally, right, you finally write The Mattering Instinct. Was it was it that you were testing it, learning more, afraid to put it? What was that process, that
Yeah,
fermenting process of 40 years?
yeah, that's a really good question. I think, it was on a back burner, and I was thinking about it. And I would talk to people about it a lot. I would talk to people about their own, what I call mattering projects, that and one of the major thesis of the book is that we're creatures of matter who long to matter. Um,
And let me
and
repeat that for people
yeah,
so that they really get it. We are creatures of matter who long to matter.
yeah. We can only say that in English, unfortunately, but it's so beautiful. It's really, I think it really captures what we are, and that there's something noble about this longing that we can never entirely put to rest. I mean, when we think we have, when we suffocate all doubts, we become insufferable. In fact, people who think they know what mattering takes, and everybody should do it exactly the way they do it.
Yeah,
And
they're in trouble, lives.
yeah, they're in trouble. So, and I say it's how our deepest longing drives us and divides us, and that universalizing urge to, my way is the only way.
Well, let me ask you, because it's occurred to me also, is um, when you first began to think about this, and we know you've had 40 years to deal with, did um, that urge or that default to division show up immediately, or did that only show up later? I was curious.
Well, I was very interested in the division because having been born into this very religious household in which there was, it was laid out to me, this is the way you are to matter, and you matter to God. What else can you want, right? And God wants you to behave this way, and you were born into this people, and He chose this people, and this is the way you. And, I read my Bertrand Russell and I didn't believe in it anymore, but I was that hold on people, on very good people. They weren't closed-minded. I mean, they were kind and wonderful people. And um, but then I began to see it other places too, even, among physicists, among the most broad-minded people, among other philosophers, like the life of the mind, the unexamined life is not worth living. Well, not everybody's made to be a philosopher, so this kind of universalizing that and yeah, I found it a lot among physicists, that we are the ones who are discovering the fundamental laws of nature. We are doing what's more important than anybody else. And these plebeians, they should just give us everything we need. But there's
Right.
there's a or I was reading an interview with Diana Vreeland, if that's the way you pronounce her name. She was I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, but she was the editor of Vogue magazine, of a big character, very opinionated.
Yes.
And she had said something like, if you don't know how to dress, you don't deserve to live. You're a nobody. And this universalizing, this is the way, this is the Mannering Project of various people, and there's a great tendency to universalize it. So it's not just religious people. I mean, but I was very aware of that coming from this religious background,
Interesting that you would have
and
seen
it
it
irked me,
yeah, that people who
yeah,
think that they are empiricists, who think that they are, it's all
exactly.
about evidence.
Exactly, exactly. Yes. It's really, and you find like the scientists dissing the humanists, you humanists, you don't know, and the humanists dissing the scientists, and whatever it is. So yeah, I'm very sensitive to that, and I think it does have something to do with my religious past and sort of coming outside of it and seeing it from the outside, that made me very sensitive to it, but yeah, it's something that I talk about in
So
the book.
it was fairly early on you saw that
Very early. Yeah,
this urge also had its dark side. Um,
exactly. Yeah.
so let me throw another sort of big question at you that I think your pursuits and this book overlap with, which I have long said I'm not an environmentalist. I just want us to cultivate a healthy relationship with the rest of nature. You know, that as
Yeah.
soon as you say I'm an environmentalist, it's out there. It's not. We are nature. We are okay. So
Yeah.
I've recorded episodes in the past several months with Zoe Schlanger regarding the light eaters, which I assume you are aware of,
Yeah.
with Janine Benyus regarding biomimicry, how we can learn from nature, with Melanie Challenger.
Mm.
Okay. Melanie Challenger has a book called How to Be Animal.
Oh, neat. Let me write that down. Okay. I'm writing it.
She's
Okay.
taking a note, folks. um,
Okay.
yeah, and she was, by the way, another one of those people that when I came across her, I went, wait, how come I didn't know her work? She's done field work in the Arctic and written librettos for operas and
Wow.
written this
Yeah.
book, How to Be Animal. But
Yeah.
so this very question has is certainly been on my mind. What is it that makes us different? And as we learn so many of the abilities that we thought made us unique, that our science has become so refined and our instruments and our data so precise that we now know, as I said, that plants appear to have agency, that animals we find one after another that seems to use tools, right? You know, that this very question of what makes us human is challenged. And it leads me to this thought, which is that the more we know, the more we know we don't know.
Yeah.
Would
Yeah.
you?
Yeah. We call this epistemic humility. Epistemic meaning knowledge, right? Humility. And it is something to be cultivated. Our epistemic humility really is
Interesting.
true. The
Yeah, the
more
things
yeah,
that we
yeah,
thought we'd settled the question,
yeah,
but we
yeah,
learn more and we go, oh, wait a minute, it's not
yeah.
settled. And so I feel like it's almost like an hourglass or a funnel.
Yeah. So, and this is a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful thing to have your mind blown that you have to oh, back to the drawing board. This framework is wrong. We have to rebuild it. And it's a humbling, you can't, if, the thing, and it's for people like me, it's always good to remind us the thing is to love ideas, not to love your ideas and to hold on to them, for dear life,
Well, almost to love questions more than loving answers.
Exactly, exactly. It's knowledge, and loving knowledge means sometimes having to give up, your particular pet idea.
Well,
And,
let me ask you here. I assume that your characters being willing to state this view of humanity and this view of the way life works meant that it must have aligned with your own sense of how you were experiencing life.
sometimes, sometimes not.
So
Sometimes not.
my
Yeah.
question is, how confident were you right away, or how did your confidence grow that you were accurately reporting things
Yeah.
about this mattering
Oh, the
instinct, that it
mattering.
wasn't just,
Yes, 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 yes. Back to that first, why did it take me so long? Well, because I
yeah,
was so worried about that. Exactly what you are. Um,
was this subjective?
it's subjective, and I knew, I already said I was always the weird kid. I accepted my weirdness, but I can't generalize for myself. I'm weird, right? I know that I'm weird. People have told me my whole life I'm weird. So, what this meant, and for me, again, this was so wonderful, is that I just had to talk to as many people from as many spheres of life as I possibly could. I really wanted to make sure that this theory, um, which both explains what we have in common in being human, but our diversity, our very, very deep diversity, and how we go about trying to justify ourselves to ourselves, um, that it would cover everybody, and it's still open. I'm open to falsification, in my ways of dealing with this. But yes, for over 40 years, I both read a tremendous amount. I love to read biographies and autobiographies, get a sense of other people's lives. First of all, it's so damn
So sort of
interesting.
one agenda going on back there somewhere is, how does this work
Exactly.
out? Does this,
Exactly.
you're dealing with some other question, but in the back of your mind, oh, they see.
Always was, yeah, always on a back burner, and always, if I could meet, like my friend, the neo-Nazi, who I write about in the book, right? Talk to him, get a sense of what that was like. He's an ex-neo-Nazi now, but what was that like to feel that people like me were his enemies and were stealing away his mattering? It had always to do with me. I can always get people. Oh, here's my funniest story. Some people don't like when I tell this story, but I was waiting for somebody, a friend, in a New York hotel lobby, and some guy comes up, and he's pestering me. He's basically trying to pick me up, right? And so, and I get him talking about his mattering project. I have my ways I can get people to, and people like to talk about this because it makes them feel like they matter because I'm so interested in
That's why it
this.
reinforces it for sure.
Exactly. And it turns out his mentoring project was to pick up women. He was a pickup artist. That's what he, and and he taught me. I learned a whole different corner of what I call the mattering map from him. He had his heroes. There were books written about this. He had his statistics, how many women, and and what he counted as success. I don't think he counted me as success, but I spent 45 minutes talking to him about this. Right? And anyway, so it's just so fascinating that you know to talk about mattering with people. They know what you're talking about. And tons of people who their mattering was their romantic partner, polyamorous or not, or an
So
entire, yeah,
I'm sure listeners are going, well,
what?
what exactly is this we're talking
Yeah,
about? So let me
yeah,
throw it to you now. And
yeah,
the question is, what is mattering and
yes.
why does it matter?
Why does it matter? Yes, it matters to each of us. So mattering means deserving of attention. So we talk about what
Deserving
matters,
of attention. And I
deserving of
may occasionally
attention.
repeat things you say because I want people to get them.
Yeah.
So mattering
So
means deserving of
deserving of
attention.
attention, and we talk about what matters, we talk about who matters, and in both cases we're meaning deserving of attention. When we say, this doesn't matter, don't waste your attention. It's a limited resource. Don't waste your mind, and dismiss it. So don't spend too much time with it. So, and we talk about who matters, as if one of the themes of the book is, in some sense, the moral sense, every human matters to the exact same degree. And one of the things that is so very wrong with society, and always has been, is that some people are treated as if they matter much more than other people. And this is exactly what social progress is all about, to try to progress
Or so we
ever
thought,
closer.
right?
Yeah, yeah. But we ask, what matters, who matters, but most importantly, we each ask, do I matter? Do I personally matter in this world? I feel like I matter. I have to feel like I matter in order to pursue my life. We're all always thinking about ourselves, and we can show this in terms of the current neuro science, people's default mode network, what they think about when they're not
Oh, right,
thinking about
right.
anything else, they're thinking about themselves. They're basically thinking about themselves. They're fantasizing. They're figuring things out. But we have to think about ourselves, and we are programmed by the laws of nature
And there's
themselves.
this sense that you talk about, that we devote all this just as other animals do also. But we devote
Yes,
all this energy, all this attention. These are like the key things in here if we're talking physics, all this
yeah,
attention and all this energy at our survival.
yes,
And then we have to justify to
that's
ourselves that we're worth it.
that we're worth it. And that I think is so far, I would say, and I'm a great animal lover. I spent a lot of time in Africa with the chimpanzees, whom I adore, and they're in some ways they're very human. But there is this aspect of justification, of justifying what we are wired to do. We are wired by first physics and then the laws of biology to think about ourselves, as all creatures, in some sense, who have attention have to think. That's why we evolve the adaptation of attentions to help us survive and thrive in hostile environments. You know, here's the food, get it. Here's the
Yeah, and so
predator,
so
run
much of
from
so much of when people talk about evolutionary psychology, evolutionary biology, and so on, the thing we hear over and over again is, why are we so negative? Or negative because you had to be aware of the sound of lightning or the rustle of a snake,
it.
and but
Exactly.
that's attention.
Attention, we're always looking for danger, and we are particularly helpless creatures, right? We don't run fast, we can't fly. You know, it took us a long time to learn how to swim, and we're born so helpless. Helplessness, unlike any other in the animal kingdom. You know, chimpanzees, within minutes of being born, they can grab their mother's fur so that she can go up to the canopy in the
And her
forest
hands are free then.
and her hands are free. And we, you know, at 6 months old, when you learn to turn over, everybody's applauding. You learned how to turn over. I mean, just to learn how to use our limbs, you know, our hands or something. And that is because of our also our great adaptive gift. We have these enormous brains. And that's why we're born so helpless, because it's hard enough to get those heads out of the birth canal. You know, and so we're born with only 30% of our eventual size of our head. That first year, you know, when you take the baby to the pediatrician, he's always measuring the circumference of the head because it's got to grow really fast to make up for the immaturity with which we're born. So we're very helpless creatures, and we have cultivated this very complicated brain, which has the capacity, which I don't see anywhere else in the animal kingdom, of being able to step outside of ourselves, look at ourselves, interrogate ourselves as if we're even another person, and say, well, who the hell do you think you are that you spend so much time paying so much attention to yourself? And we want to justify ourselves in our own eyes. And
First to
that's
ourselves.
first to ourselves. We'll use other people for the justification. Oh, well, they think I'm worth a lot of attention, and so I must be, or maybe not. I mean, but this sends us into all different strategies of trying to justify ourselves to ourselves.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I think
So
that
let
this,
me jump to another
yeah,
couple of points in here. One is, I and many, I would assume, would be surprised that a key component of your analysis is the second law of thermodynamics,
yeah,
entropy. And we can't go into it in depth, but as I said at the top, discovered in a novel and rooted in thermodynamics, really.
that's
And
right. That's
so,
right.
so
Yeah.
introduce us to that notion.
Yeah. So when I say that we are creatures of matter who long to matter, well, what is it about the matter, right? I mean, I want the science of matter, which is physics, to help us understand how we become these creatures who long to matter. So we start with the supreme law of of physics, the one law that physicists say will never be falsified. And I explain in the, it's not hard to understand, really. I
No,
explain
no.
it in the book. Yeah, but it's really important. And it has applications throughout everything, our psychology.
Yeah, it is
Like,
the root law.
it's the root law. It is the supreme law, and I even use it to try to come to ethics at the end. You know, some guidelines for how we might uh, best minister to this longing to matter. What it says is that all systems are going towards their own destruction. Everything is going toward disorder,
Right.
and
Disorder,
disorder,
disorganization, chaos. That's the
chaos.
direction that
That's
everything is in.
that's the direction that every
It
system.
isn't just it feels that way sometimes, it's actually true.
Exactly, and it's the universe itself is going to run out of energy. We call it in physics the heat death of the universe. And this sounds very, very, very depressing, but it is. It really isn't. I mean, it is the way it is. It's nature. This is the way nature is. And the thing, so we start there, and the thing to understand is that all biological systems are organized in such a way as to resist entropy. That's what it
That's
means
right.
to
You
be
cannot
alive.
defeat it, but you can resist it.
Exactly, exactly. And life is very organized. It depends on such a high degree of order. And we have to take in a tremendous amount of energy, and that energy is all used to resist entropy. That's what it's all about. Now you understand all of biology. That's what it's really all about. Um, and we too, the little blade of grass struggling up through the crack in the concrete is taking in energy from the sunlight, and we are taking in energy from sunlight and from food to resist thermal equilibrium, which is disorder. Another word for which is death. that's that.
Right.
That's what it is. And this is very, very important to know. And
So sitting on the foundation of that, which is the ultimate consequence, um, then we have our individual efforts to
yes,
resist entropy, which is to live. And I will, just so we don't end up short of it, it would be my last question, but I don't want us to end up without it. You actually, if someone asks you, well, what is your guidance? Taking all of this into account, what is your guidance for individuals and for society? And it's rooted in entropy again.
it's rooted in entropy again. I say all of life is counter-entropic, is fighting entropy. So if we want to live our life in a way that's non-arbitrary, it's just I want what I want and I want it when I want it, and we see plenty of that taking place in the world, right?
Right?
Right. And we know if we're not those people doing it, we know this is wrong, right? And so what are the guidelines? Well, first of all, first and foremost, the golden rule is to understand that what is motivating you, your need to justify your own self in your eyes, is taking place wherever there's human life. This is, and so to the extent that you
So you
matter,
can universalize that,
yes, I would. That's the right level of universalizing, right?
is the
It's just
challenge.
it's just another way of saying that we all matter equally. In the moral sense, we all matter equally. There's no way to try to say, yeah, it's me, I matter more. It's my group, I matter more. Those arguments all fall to pieces. The only way to justify your own mattering is to universalize it to everybody. So that is a guideline. And then, I mean, that actually rules out a whole bunch of mattering projects that are built on undermining other people's mattering. But either people who are in your life, dominate them, don't let them live life as they want, don't let them work out their own mattering projects, or, your group, my group, matters more than this group, that this is all of that is ruled out. Um, and that's, but even, better, I would say, it's not for everybody, but better, I would say, is to the extent that your mattering project is not only serving your own mattering, you're getting on with your life, you feel like um, but it's on the side of life itself, not just your life, but the life beyond you, other people, other sentient creatures, the life of the planet, whatever, plant a garden. It's better than destroying a garden. Um, that this is these are good ways of trying to satisfy your mattering instinct.
And
And
so
it doesn't have to be grand, you
that's
know?
right. That's right. A life where you swim successfully upstream day
Yes.
by day, moment by moment,
Yeah.
um, that's a life. And
That's
you
a
talk
life. Yeah.
about Wittgenstein, who had a life of misery, and
Misery.
he on his deathbed he said, "I had a wonderful life," basically.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the chapters sort of says, it's not the emotion of happiness so much, that episode of, that comes and goes and is meant to come and go, because happiness, like all of the emotions, evolved to give us feedback about, our circumstances and how well they are ministering to our own need to survive and to thrive. So it comes and it goes. And actually, if you know the neuroscience of happiness, being flooded by these neurotransmitters, it's not meant to last. So, to spend your life, well, I sort of did spend my life looking after this kind of ecstasy, but to do just want that, and that, all the time. It's what we really want is life satisfaction, that we feel that our life, as a whole, is satisfactory to ourselves, and at least not doing any harm to anybody else. That's these are the moral guidelines that I
Right.
would
And
like to see.
we've got to bring it to a close, but
Yeah,
one last thing I wanted you to share was those four different sort of mattering types, because I think
yeah,
people always are interested in that sort of thing, and kind of how that system works. And
yeah.
that's what you called your mattering map,
That's my Mattering map. Yeah.
which was
So
laid out by that character in that novel in 1983.
that's right. But she didn't know what I have subsequently learned, which was that with all of the different ways, the pickup artists and, all different ways, that there are four general strategies. That's what I hypothesized after speaking to all of so many people, probably hundreds. Um, so one is what I call the transcenders, and they are, what I was born into. They are those who think, that there is a metaphysical presence in the universe, who, whether they call it God or something bigger and more spiritual, and we get our mattering from this presence, this
From our
trans
relationship to that divine
Chip, yes,
presence.
yes, 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 who wants us to live in a certain way, and that's what we ought to do.
So successful
Um,
mattering to that person is that they they are seen good in the eyes of God.
exactly, exactly. And I have to say, I mean, it induces a very great sense of mattering. I mean, that God Almighty cares about what, you do with your life and is
That's,
watching.
that's right.
It's-
No, it's
It,
funny because of course mattering is worthy of attention, and the notion that there is the creator of the universe is paying attention to your little life.
Exactly. That is a real sense of deservingness of attention, right? It's God Almighty. I would joke because, I was brought up, to be very, very kosher. And so there were these hostess cream cakes. And I would say, that I felt that the Lord of the hosts would be offended if I ate a hostess cream cake, that. So yes, a little play
Yeah.
on words. So they're said.
So
Then there are
that's the transcender.
those are the transcenders. Then most people, I find, when I talk to them about mattering, they think mattering to others. That it's mattering to others that really counts as mattering,
That
and
to
it could
them
be
it's almost that phrase is almost to matter is to matter
exactly.
to others.
They hear me actually asking that. They supply that
Hmm.
adverbial
Right.
phrase to others, and it could be people who are in their life. It could be perfect strangers. So many millennials that I have spoken to, they want to be famous. And what is it to be famous? It's to matter to a bunch of strangers, you know. And once in
And
a
before, what we knew was that athletes, politicians, actors, musicians, they might
yes,
do that. But now in this life of screens and influencers,
exactly.
everyone can both aspire to and fall short
Exactly. Yes. That this is a career choice that I hear from so many millennials to be an influencer, and so it's very interesting. But, if a bunch of people are finding you worthy of their attention, that can satisfy your need to justify your own attention to yourself. So,
And by the
cult,
way, I will
yeah,
just say that when I looked into this, I found myself partly a transcender, which is interesting because I'm
yeah,
basically an atheist. But
yeah.
you know what I mean, I
I
think.
know exactly what you
Yeah.
mean. Yes.
That I'm
Yes.
living up to my relationship with the rest of existence or something. But then a socializer. And
Yeah.
here I am, saying that someone should want to listen to my conversation.
Yeah. 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 And I should say about all of these ways, they can be met creatively, they can be met destructively, all of them,
Oh, creatively or destructively.
or destructively. Yes, you can be a religious person who is very creative about it. You can be a destroyer, right? A
Or as
really
we assume that most, it's the assumption, if not the fact, that most mass shooters, we assume attention might have been one of the main motivations.
Oh, man, one of the things that yeah, and there they really were socialized. They want attention from other people. And I read through, the government keeps a whole catalog of the statements that were left behind by mass shooters and their manifestos and I read through all of them, and the longing to matter comes through pathetically. These are people who just did not feel like they matter. And for example, the Parkland, Florida shooter, and he gets up saying, I'm a nobody, you don't know. And then you will all know of me, stay tuned. And he gives the date when he's planning this thing. You will judge your life before I appeared and after your lives will be
That's
as if
right. So that's the dark socializer.
the dark socializer. Then there are heroic strivers. This is a different type, and they're not trying to matter to others, neither to God nor to other people. They have some certain standards of excellence in mind. It can be intellectual, athletic, aesthetic, artistic, ethical. And so I portray, I tell the story of Baba Amte, who was an atheist, but a saint. He was an ethical striver. He set out to wipe out tuberculosis in his native India and did many other things. But they have a sense of they must meet these standards or they can't live with themselves. A lot of people in academia are intellectual, heroic strivers. And
It's
then the
interesting, by
last,
the way, when I was in school studying, I was at Harvard in the late 60s, and I studied with David McClelland, whether you know him or not. He was quite an interesting figure at the time, but he created the notion of achievement motivation.
oh my God, I know all about him. Yes, David McClelland, the Murray-McClelland theory, personality theory. Yes, yes, and
Yeah,
it
and Murray
really correlates
was
with,
the TA guy, right? I mean,
yeah.
you know what I
No,
mean?
Murray was the older one, and then McClelland
Yes,
took it over
exactly,
from him.
exactly. Oh,
Yeah,
I didn't
yeah.
mean teaching assistant. I meant
Oh,
thematic a perception. Is
exactly,
you know what I'm
exactly.
talking
Yes, yes,
about. We're getting in the
exactly.
weeds here,
Yeah,
Rebecca.
but
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 I'm
it does
saying that
correlate. Yeah.
achievement motivation is heroic strivers.
Those exactly, and there's a real correlation. The affiliation people, those are socializers, and the competitors, power, being more than others, overpowering. So the competitors, which is the last type, and these are people who really would hear my questions about mattering as mattering more than others. That in order to feel that they matter, they have to feel. And we have such an example.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, zero sum
A zero sum
defines his worldview.
completely. I mean, it is to understand everything he says. Yeah. So, and a lot of the other people who are around him, Elon Musk, all of these people,
Yeah,
that this
yeah,
is, yeah.
yeah. I
Um,
mean, in other words, one could say the competitors um, in our system of incentives and rewards and so on have sort of metastasized,
yes, they have. They really have,
and
yeah,
it's what we're up against now.
it is up. We're up, and that is actually one of the reasons that I actually finally got my act together and wrote the book.
I
Uh,
figured.
yeah,
Conditions demanded it. One of the things that I
because,
often ask, which I didn't this time, is that thing that we often ask in conversation. Does this need to be said? Does it need to be said now? And does it need to be said by me? And I
yeah,
felt like that you're finally what answered what led you to finally write the book was, does this need to be said now?
exactly right. Exactly right. You know, we've created a kind of a society in which it seems there's not enough mattering to go around. And that brings out the Oh, that brings out the smallness in people. It's like a bunch of children, I say, under a piñata, just trying to grab up everything they can for themselves. And, we're in a society in which you have to be very, very rich or very, very powerful or very, very famous or all of those together, and then you matter. Um, and that is a society that is not working for us. It can't
That's
work
right.
for us.
That's
It
right.
can't work for us. So
Okay.
it's gotta be changed.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
What fun. I love talking to you. It was really, really fun.
Great. So let me tell people the book is The Mattering Instinct: How Our Deepest Longing Drives Us and Divides Us. Rebecca's website is Rebecca Goldstein, just as you would think, one word.com. For this conversation and many other interviews and articles, to join me in pursuit of a world that just might work, go to terrencemcnally.net, TERRENCEMCNALLY.net, or a world that just might work.com. They're the same website. If you want to get my weekly announcement telling you who's going to be on, what we're going to talk about, and links to probably 10 or 15 articles to flesh out the conversation, email me at temcnally, TEMCNALLY, at mac.com. And in the archives, which are available not just at my site, but at Apple Podcasts and Spotify and YouTube, you will find hundreds. I've been recording these conversations since 1996. Um, and finally, thank you to Kiana Williams in production, George Vasilopoulos at Progressive Voices, and most of all, you, my listeners, please share this podcast widely. And finally, thank you to Rebecca Goldstein. Keep up your good work.
Well, thank you so much. You too.